You are nothing but a cheap, imported keyboard monkey. So when I tell you to take the fall for this, you shut your mouth and you get on the damn floor." The scalding hot espresso shattered against Julian's chest. Dark brown liquid dripped down the frayed collar of his faded thrift store dress shirt. It soaked into his skin, burning him instantly. Let's freeze this exact moment. Look at those droplets of coffee suspended in the freezing, air-conditioned air of the 42nd floor server room. Look at the absolute, unfiltered disgust twisting the face of Richard. Richard is a senior vice president of a multi-billion-dollar financial firm. He is a man born with a silver spoon so deep in his throat he chokes on his own entitlement. He wears a $5,000 bespoke suit, smells of imported cologne, and holds the power to destroy lives with a single phone call. And then, look at Julian. Julian is a 23-year-old intern. He is a first-generation immigrant, surviving on a diet of instant noodles and sheer, desperate willpower. His shoulders are slumped, his eyes are fixed on the floor, and his hands are trembling uncontrollably. To anyone else watching this frozen frame, it looks like the ultimate defeat of the underdog. It looks like another tragic story where the rich elite crush the vulnerable working class without a second thought. But appearances can be incredibly deceiving. Because what Richard does not know, and what the rest of this corrupt firm is about to find out, is that the quiet, trembling kid standing in front of him is not shaking out of fear. He is shaking because he is trying to contain the absolute devastation he is about to unleash on this entire empire. Before we watch Richard's entire life collapse into a spectacular pile of ashes, we need to go back. We need to rewind the clock exactly 8 months to understand how a brilliant mind gets pushed to the absolute edge of human endurance. And if you have ever been treated like garbage by someone who thought they were better than you just because of their bank account or their job title, I want you to make a promise to yourself right now. I want you to go down to the comments and type this exact declaration. I refuse to let anyone's arrogance dictate my worth, and I will build my strength in silence. Type it out like a prayer. Type it out like a promise to your future self. I refuse to let anyone's arrogance dictate my worth, and I will build my strength in silence. Let that be your anchor as you watch this story unfold. And if you want to see more stories of absolute, undeniable karma hitting the people who deserve it most, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Stick around, because the satisfaction you are going to feel at the end of this video is going to feed your soul. 8 months ago, Julian walked through the revolving glass doors of Zenith Capital for the very first time. He did not belong there, and the building made sure he felt it. Everything was marble, glass, and polished steel. The air itself felt expensive, heavy with the scent of wealth and unspoken threats. Julian was hired as a back-end data intern, which is corporate speak for a digital janitor. His job was to clean up the messy, broken lines of code left behind by the senior developers who were paid 6 figures to do half the work. But Julian did not care about the disrespect. He did not care that his desk was practically shoved inside a supply closet next to a humming, overheated server rack. He needed this job more than he needed oxygen. Every single night, after working a grueling 14-hour shift, Julian took the subway straight to the city hospital. The smell of antiseptic and stale cafeteria food was permanently etched into his brain. His mother was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to a tangle of tubes, fighting a failing liver. The medical bills were not just piling up. They were a suffocating avalanche of red ink. $50,000 for the first surgery, $20,000 for the specialized medication. Every time Julian looked at the heart monitor, he saw a ticking debt clock that was threatening to put his family on the street. So, Julian kept his head down. He swallowed his pride, he ignored the snide remarks about his cheap shoes, and he worked. He worked like a man possessed. While the senior managers were taking 3-hour martini lunches on the company card, Julian was diving deep into the bank's massive historical data archives. He started noticing patterns, tiny invisible fractures in the market data that human eyes were missing. Algorithms were supposed to catch these anomalies, but the bank's current risk assessment software was outdated, clunky, and painfully slow. It was a blind giant stumbling through a minefield. Julian knew he could fix it. Actually, he knew he could do more than just fix it. He could completely reinvent it. For 4 months, he slept maybe 3 hours a night. He would code on the subway. He would code sitting in the uncomfortable plastic chair next to his mother's hospital bed, the soft glow of his cheap laptop illuminating her pale face. He built a predictive risk modeling engine from scratch. It was a masterpiece of machine learning. It was elegant, aggressive, and terrifyingly accurate. He called it Project Aegis. When he ran the first historical simulation on the bank's past 10 years of trades, the results made his blood run cold. His algorithm did not just predict the market crashes. It identified specific, catastrophic internal leaks within Zenith Capital's own trading division. Leaks that were costing the firm tens of millions of dollars every single quarter. Julian realized he was holding the golden ticket. This was his way out of the supply closet. This was the promotion, the bonus, the lifeline that would pay off his mother's medical debt in a single heartbeat. With a pounding heart, he compiled the data, printed out a flawless 60-page report, and placed it directly on the mahogany desk of his direct supervisor. That supervisor was Richard. Richard, the man who wore suits that cost more than Julian's entire college tuition. Richard, the man who looked at Julian not as a human being, but as a replaceable, insignificant insect. Julian thought the code would speak for itself. He thought merit actually mattered in this glass tower. He was so incredibly naive. Richard did not even look up when Julian placed the report on his desk. He just waved his manicured hand, dismissing the kid like a pesky fly. But later that night, when the office was completely empty, Richard actually read it. And as he turned page after page, his greedy eyes widened. Richard was not a genius, but he was incredibly skilled at recognizing something he could exploit. He saw exactly what Project Aegis was. It was a goldmine. It was the kind of revolutionary software that would guarantee him a massive promotion, a multi-million-dollar end-of-year bonus, and a permanent seat on the executive board. But there was one massive problem. The name on the title page was Julian. To Richard, the idea that a 23-year-old immigrant intern could outsmart the entire senior engineering team was not just embarrassing. It was deeply offensive to his inflated ego. In Richard's twisted mind, people like Julian did not deserve credit. They existed simply to serve as stepping stones for men like him. So, Richard did what entitled men in expensive suits do best. He stole it. He took Julian's flawless code, stripped away the security protocols that Julian had carefully designed, and slapped his own name right on the cover. He rebranded it as his own proprietary algorithmic creation. The betrayal hit Julian 3 days later during a company-wide email announcement. The CEO himself was praising Richard for his incredible breakthrough in risk management technology. Julian sat at his tiny desk in the supply closet, staring at the glowing monitor in absolute disbelief. His heart pounded furiously against his ribs. His hands felt numb. The code they were talking about was his. Every single line, every single sleepless night in that hospital room, it all belonged to him. He had built that system to save his mother's life, and Richard had just snatched it away to buy another vacation home. Driven by a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline, Julian stood up and marched straight to Richard's corner office. The corner office was a massive sanctuary of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the entire city's skyline. Julian pushed the heavy glass door open without knocking. Richard was leaning back in his Italian leather chair, sipping an espresso and admiring his own reflection in the window. Julian's voice trembled as he demanded an explanation. He held up his original source code files. He pleaded, explaining his mother's desperate medical situation and begging Richard to just tell the truth. He did not even want all the glory. He just wanted the bonus he had rightfully earned to pay off the hospital debt. Richard slowly put his espresso cup down. A terrifying, cold smile crept across his perfectly tanned face. He stood up, walked around the massive desk, and stopped inches away from Julian. He looked down at the intern with a gaze so full of contempt it could freeze water. And then, Richard spoke softly, his words dripping with venom. He told Julian that nobody would ever believe a desperate, uneducated kid from a poor neighborhood over a senior vice president with a Harvard degree. He laughed at the mention of Julian's dying mother. He actually laughed. He told Julian that if he breathed a single word of this to HR or the board, he would personally ensure Julian was blacklisted from every financial institution on the planet. He threatened to tie Julian up in endless corporate litigation until his family was utterly bankrupt and living on the streets. "You are a ghost here," Richard whispered, poking Julian hard in the chest. "You own nothing. You are nothing. And you will take whatever crumbs I decide to throw at you." The cruelty was suffocating. Outside the glass walls, dozens of other employees were watching this interaction unfold. They saw the aggressive body language. They saw Julian shrinking back, looking utterly broken and defeated. But every single one of those coworkers quickly averted their eyes. They pretended to look at their keyboards. They chose the safety of silence over the risk of standing up for what was right. The toxic culture of Zenith Capital demanded absolute submission to power, and they were all complicit. Julian stood there, completely alone in a room full of people. The realization crashed down on him like a physical weight. Working hard was not enough in a system designed to crush you. Playing by the rules was a joke when the people at the top were writing the rules to protect themselves. He felt a profound, agonizing helplessness tearing at his soul. Have you ever felt that exact kind of helplessness? Have you ever poured your heart and soul into something, only to have it ripped away by someone who abused their power just because they could? It is a very specific type of pain that changes a person forever. If you know that pain, I want you to go down to the comments right now. We are not going to stay silent like those coworkers. Repeat the promise. Type it out loudly and proudly for everyone to see. I refuse to let anyone's arrogance dictate my worth, and I will build my strength in silence. Let Richard think he has won. Let him puff out his chest and parade around the office like a conquering king. Because what Richard did not bother to understand when he stole that software is that brilliant coders always leave a signature. And a desperate man with absolutely nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature on the face of the earth. Julian slowly backed out of that glass office, his eyes fixed on the floor. He went back to his tiny desk by the server room. But he was no longer the frightened kid who walked in that morning. Something inside him had permanently snapped. The fear was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. He sat down in his broken office chair. The rhythmic hum of the servers sounded like a ticking clock in his ears. Tick, tock. Every second was $1 added to his mother's medical debt. Tick, tock. Every second was another moment of Richard basking in stolen glory. Julian pulled up the raw terminal on his computer screen. He didn't cry. He didn't throw a tantrum. He simply let the cold blue light of the monitor wash over his face. Richard thought he had stolen a finished product. He thought he had taken a perfectly polished diamond, but Julian had designed Project Aegis. He knew every single hidden vein, every artery, and every blind spot within those millions of lines of code. And, more importantly, he knew that when Richard ripped out the security protocols to hide Julian's digital fingerprints, he had completely exposed the system's core architecture. Richard had practically left the front door wide open and thrown away the lock. Julian's fingers hovered over his worn-out keyboard. He closed his eyes for just a moment, picturing his mother's face. He pictured the tired, beautiful smile she gave him every night when he visited the hospital. She had sacrificed everything to bring him to this country, to give him a chance at a better life. He was not going to let a parasite like Richard destroy that sacrifice. He opened his eyes. The hesitation vanished. His fingers began to fly across the keys with terrifying speed. He was not just writing code anymore. He was weaving a digital noose, thread by thread, right in the shadows of the bank's own mainframe. He was building a ghost inside the machine. A silent, invisible phantom that would wait patiently for the absolute perfect moment to strike. For the next 3 days, Julian played the part perfectly. He brought Richard his coffee. He nodded obediently when Richard barked orders at him. He absorbed the insults, the mockery, and the sickening arrogance with a blank, unreadable expression. Every time Richard smiled at him, Julian just stared back, silently feeding his own inner fire. He was biding his time, waiting for the trap to spring. And that brings us right back to this freezing server room on the 42nd floor. The day of the big presentation. Let's bring us right back to this freezing server room on the 42nd floor. The scorching hot espresso is still dripping down Julian's chest. It burns, but Julian does not even flinch. Richard is towering over him, his face red with unearned, toxic arrogance. "You are nothing but a cheap, imported keyboard monkey." Richard's cruel words echo off the metal server racks. He violently kicks a rolling chair out of his way, demanding that Julian take the blame for a massive server crash that happened earlier that morning. A crash that Richard actually caused because he tried to modify the stolen Aegis code without understanding a single thing about how it actually functioned. Richard desperately needs a scapegoat before the emergency board meeting starts in exactly 5 minutes. He points a freshly manicured finger directly at Julian's face, spit flying from his lips. "So when I tell you to take the fall for this, you shut your mouth and you get on the damn floor." Any other day, any other month, Julian would have apologized. He would have cleaned up the mess and let Richard crush him. But not today. Today, Julian does not look away. He does not shrink back into the shadows of the supply closet. He slowly reaches into the pocket of his faded trousers and pulls out a small, encrypted flash drive. He looks dead into Richard's eyes, and for the first time in 8 agonizing months, Julian smiles. It is not a warm smile. It is a cold, terrifying, dead-eyed smile that makes Richard involuntarily take a step back. "I am not taking the fall for anything, Richard," Julian says, his voice completely steady and chillingly calm. "In fact, I think it is time the executive board sees the real presentation." Richard scoffs, trying desperately to regain his dominant posture. "What are you talking about, you little rat?" Julian turns his back to Richard and steps up to the master terminal. He plugs the small flash drive into the primary port. "I am talking about the backdoor I left in my code." Richard's perfectly tanned face instantly drains of color. His jaw drops open slightly. "What did you do?" Richard whispers, his voice suddenly trembling with genuine terror. Julian's fingers hit the mechanical keyboard. He types in a sequence of master overrides so incredibly fast that Richard cannot even process what is happening on the screen. "When you stole Project Aegis, you ripped out the security protocols," Julian explains calmly, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the monitor. "You wanted to erase my digital fingerprints. But you were too stupid to realize that those security protocols were not there to protect the bank from outside hackers." Julian pauses, lifting his hand. His index finger hovers right over the enter key. "They were there to protect you from me." Julian violently presses the enter key. A green loading bar flashes across the screen. Down the hall, in the massive glass-walled boardroom, the CEO and 12 highly paid executive board members are staring at a massive projection screen. They are sipping sparkling water, waiting for Richard's emergency diagnostic report. Instead, the massive screen aggressively flickers. The prestigious Zenith Capital logo vanishes completely. In its place, a highly detailed, undeniable data log appears. It is not just market data. It is a complete, unredacted, deeply personal history of Richard's internal communications. It highlights the exact timestamps of when Richard illegally copied Julian's original source files. It displays the original copyright metadata with Julian's full legal name, completely untouched in the deep architecture of the code. But Julian did not stop there. Because if you are going to burn a monster, you have to burn the entire forest down. The presentation screen automatically cycles to the next slide. It is a deep dive forensic analysis of Richard's personal offshore trading accounts. Julian had secretly used the Aegis algorithm to track the bank's notoriously missing funds. The algorithm traced tens of millions of dollars of internal slippage directly to an anonymous shell company in the Cayman Islands. A shell company legally registered under the maiden name of Richard's wife. In the boardroom, there is absolute, deafening silence. The CEO's face turns pale, and then turns dark purple with uncontrollable fury. Back in the server room, Richard is completely paralyzed. His breathing becomes shallow and erratic. His expensive smartphone starts buzzing wildly in his tailored pocket. He slowly pulls it out with shaking hands. The glowing caller ID simply says, "CEO, urgent." Richard looks at the phone, then looks at Julian, his eyes wide with absolute, primal panic. "Please," Richard begs, his arrogant voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. "Please, Julian, I will give you anything. I will give you the massive bonus. I will personally pay for your mother's hospital bills right now. Just shut it down." Julian looks at the pathetic man who had tormented him for months. He looks at the man who had the audacity to laugh at his dying mother. "My mother raised me to be a man of my word," Julian says softly, stepping away from the terminal. "And I promised myself that I would never let another person dictate my worth." Julian reaches out and casually unplugs the flash drive. "The data is already live on the cloud, Richard. It has been automatically forwarded to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and 3 major news outlets. There is no shutting it down." Through the glass walls of the server room, they can see the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the surrounding skyscrapers. The police sirens wail in the distance, getting louder and more aggressive with every passing second. 2 heavily armed corporate security guards violently burst into the IT department. They do not even look at Julian. They grab Richard by the arms of his expensive bespoke suit, slamming him against the wall. Richard completely breaks down. He drops to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably, begging the guards to let him explain. His entire illustrious career, his stolen wealth, his fake reputation, all completely destroyed in less than 60 seconds. He is dragged out of the office, kicking and screaming, right in front of the exact same coworkers who had watched him abuse Julian. Julian watches him go, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute peace. He quietly packs up his cheap laptop. He walks out of the building, pushing through the revolving doors, and takes a deep breath of the fresh, cold city air. 3 months later, Zenith Capital was slapped with a massive federal fine. Richard was denied bail and ultimately sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, embezzlement, and severe corporate espionage. And Julian? Under the federal SEC whistleblower program, the person who exposes major financial fraud is legally entitled to a percentage of the recovered funds. Julian received a direct tax-free deposit of $4.2 million. He walked into the city hospital, paid off every single cent of his mother's medical debt in cash, and moved her to a beautiful, private recovery estate in the countryside. He built his strength in absolute silence, and he let his massive success make all the noise. But this story leaves us with a very uncomfortable, deeply disturbing question. I want you to think about those coworkers in the office. The dozens of educated, capable people who watched Richard throw hot coffee on Julian. The people who looked away, pretending not to see the horrific abuse because they were too scared of losing their own paychecks. If you were sitting at that desk, watching an innocent kid get systematically destroyed by a wealthy tyrant, what would you honestly do? Would you risk your entire career, your reputation, and your family's financial security to stand up for a complete stranger? Or would you lower your head, stare at your keyboard, and choose the cowardly safety of silence? Be completely honest with yourself. Go down to the comments right now and tell me what you would actually do if you were in that room. I read every single one of your answers. Because the brutal truth is, the world is not destroyed by the people who do evil. It is destroyed by the people who watch them do it and do absolutely nothing.